In this module, we're going to look in a little more detail and a little more formally at how one utterance can yield several different implicatures. So let's start off with an example, and then we're going to walk through what it might mean and how we get to that meaning. So imagine I say, the water is warm. There's one common way that people often interpret this, which is you might think that I mean the water is warm, but it's not hot. Right? So this is a maybe special kind of implicature that's often called a scalar implicature. We're going to talk about it a little more in some later modules. But all that's important for now is this idea that if I say the water is warm, people often interpret that as meaning the water, meaning that I mean the water is not hot. So let's walk step by step through what are the logical steps that you take to go from the water is warm to thinking I mean the water is not hot. So first of all, you might consider that I could have said the water is hot. So for some reason, I chose not to say that. I said the water is warm instead. So you might assume that there must be some reason I chose not to say the water is hot. The next step is, then you might think the reason is I must not believe that the water is hot. Right? If I chose not to say it, the reason is maybe that I don't believe it. If I'm communicating in a cooperative way and I believed the water was hot, then I would have said that. But since I didn't say it, maybe that means I don't believe it. But the important thing to keep in mind here is this still doesn't explain how you can hear me say the water is hot and think that I believe the water is not hot, right? Because notice the key difference between I don't believe the water is hot versus I believe the water is not hot, right? So what we're seeing here so far is you've got some reason to think I don't believe the water is hot, but that doesn't yet give you reason to think I do believe the water is not hot, because I might believe that, or I might just have no opinion, right? Maybe I didn't say the water is hot because I don't know. Okay? So how do we get from me saying the water is hot to you thinking that I mean the water is not hot? We've got these first two steps, right? You realize that I could have said the water is hot and I didn't say it for some reason, so maybe I don't believe it. Those are the first two steps. The next step is you have to assume that I have an opinion, right? So if you assume that I have an opinion one way or the other, then you can do the last step. The last step is saying, okay, based on step 2, I must not believe that water is hot. And step 3, I must have an opinion one way or the other. So I can't just have no idea. So if I have an opinion and I don't believe the water is hot, there's only one possibility left. And that last possibility is I believe the water is not hot. Right? So these are the 4 steps that supposedly are involved in going from hearing me say the water is warm to thinking that I mean the water is not hot. Right? The reason that I show you this example is because it illustrates this key distinction between I don't believe the water is hot versus I believe the water is not hot. Right? So it sounds very subtle and it sounds very nitpicky, but this distinction is going to be important as we talk about some other kinds of implicatures as we go through the later modules. So there's actually 2 different implicatures that come up when I say the water is warm. The first one is when you think I must not believe that the water is hot. That's sometimes called a weak implicature, right? Because it rules out one belief, but it doesn't make a strong case about what I believe or not. The second implicature that comes up is the one that I believe the water is not hot. That one's sometimes called a strong implicature, right? And that one only comes up if we go through step 3 and we assume that I have an opinion one way or the other. So this distinction between weak and strong implicatures and the distinction between not believing something versus believing not something, that distinction will be important as we analyze a few other cases in the next few modules.